In recent weeks, there has been a flurry of misinformation published regarding the case of Lucy Letby. This has appeared in various mainstream articles, interviews, and documentaries created by individuals who did not attend the trial. To help dispel these falsehoods, this video will be part of a series that dives deeper into the case of Lucy Letby. The following information is taken directly from transcripts approved by the court, further details of which can be found in the video description box. The main goal of this series is to remove any personal opinion or bias and simply present the facts of this case as told in court. Now, at the end of 9 months of hearing evidence against Lucy Letby, the jury were presented with the following summary of the prosecution's case. This took place at Manchester Crown Court and was conducted by Nicholas Johnson, KC. At 23:45, child E was intubated as an emergency. The capnograph told Dr. Harkness that the tube was in the correct place, and a discoloration on child E remained. In cross-examination, it was suggested to Dr. Harkness he should have intubated child E before that time, and he was accused of incompetence for delaying the blood transfusion. But the truth, ladies and gentlemen, is that it was Lucy Letby harming child E. And because she was the cause, and because she wasn't letting on what she had done, the doctors were never going to be able to save him. You will remember that Dr. C arrived at 0025 on the 4th of August, had a discussion with Dr. Harkness at the cot side, and then they moved from the cot side over to review the X-ray on the computer and to review the blood results. And even if you don't remember it, you know what happens next, don't you? They move away to a computer, either at the nurse's station or in nursery 1. And we know it's just around that little wall in nursery 1. And it was at that point that child E deteriorated for the final time. What are the chances of that? It being precisely that moment. Child E collapsed for the final time at about 0025. CPR was started, drugs administered. Child E was given a blood transfusion at 0050. And as CPR was given, blood came from his nose and his mouth, the like of which Dr. Harkness had never ever seen before. But after 10 minutes, spontaneous heart rate returned. You've heard that before, haven't you? In several cases. Not least, perhaps most dramatically, child C. But unhappily, child E didn't survive. You will remember that Dr. C advised against having a post-mortem, a decision or advice that she plainly substantially regretted, you may think, when she gave evidence. And she made the point in the witness box that with any C, a child's observations deteriorate over a longer period of time than happened with child E, and that the normal X-rays that were taken of child E were not consistent with any C. No one now, as far as we understand, seriously suggests that child E did have NEC. Dr. C also discounted stomach ulceration on the basis that if a child died from a natural blood loss, she'd have expected to see a more gradual deterioration, not these cliff-edge type deteriorations that child E had. And if it was a gradual blood loss, as you would expect in the case of a stomach ulceration, the heart rate would go up and the blood pressure would go down. And that was not what was happening with child E. She, like Dr. Harkness, said she had never seen bleeding like this before in a small baby, and she said that other than child E's blood glucose, which had normalised in the lead-up to the events of this shift, there was nothing in his observations to suggest that he was unwell in the sense of there being a cause for the bleeding and collapse. The expert evidence is a big help, ladies and gentlemen, to you, we suggest, in determining what happened. Importantly, and in the absence of a post-mortem examination, it excludes the possibility of child E having died from natural causes. Professor Kinsey excluded the possibility of there having been a congenital bleeding disorder, and you'll remember what she said about child F, I'm sure. The fact that he is child E's identical twin, the fact that she had looked at child F's blood results and could therefore exclude the possibility of there being a congenital bleeding disorder. Child E was bleeding from the throat, just like child C, like child G, and like child N. Child C was before child G, child N was later. Dr. Arthurs told us that the imaging didn't really help with what happened to child E, and went on to say that the absence of air in the great vessels didn't make a difference in determining the issue of air embolism, because images are not taken in the acute resuscitation period, and therefore you would not expect to see air. He also said that because very few babies die of air embolus, there isn't a great deal of imaging. No imaging records really to compare against. Dr. Evans was taken to task for having suggested in one of his earlier reports that perhaps the nasogastric tube was used to cause an injury to child E. The very thing that the mother of child E and F says Lucy Letby said to her on the night, ironically. He said that when he had seen a tube before the trial started, he'd rejected that himself as a theory. But that didn't stop him being criticised for having raised it in the first place. And the important point being made by Dr. Evans was that the bleeding was not the result of some natural or innocent phenomenon. In answer to questions about stress, Dr. Evans said it doesn't turn up out of the blue on day 5 or 6 of a child's life. And you will remember the evidence of Nurse B, who said that child E had been out during the day having skin-to-skin contact, and you'll find that in the nursing notes, with his mum for most of the day before he died. So that is not stressful for a little baby. Dr. Evans referred to the graphic description given by Dr. Harkness of flitting patches of discoloration, and told you that in his view that was clear evidence of air in the circulation. And if child E was caused a bleeding injury or had air in his circulation, we suggest there's only one person that can have been responsible. So far as child E's bleeding was concerned, Dr. Evans thought it had to be the result of trauma and pointed to the fact that neonatal units are full of bits of equipment, such as suction tubes or introducers, which might have been used. And he was cross-examined at some length about that, and it was suggested that there was no evidential basis for saying that an introducer had been used. Well, the evidential basis, ladies and gentlemen, is the result of whatever it was that happened that was not a natural event. We say something was used. This was no naturally occurring bleed. Many other children in this case had inexplicable bleeds somewhere in their throats or coming up from below the vocal cords. That's a phrase you're now very familiar with in this case. And as I say, the most obvious other cases, child N, child C, child G, and one I missed out from my earlier list, I think, child H as well. So you have a list there of 5 children of these 17 where this unusual sign was spotted. Dr. Bowen gave you a more important detail. She began by reminding us that child E was being fed normally up until 2100 hours on August 3rd. In other words, the time that the mother of child E and F went down to the unit. Dr. Bowen described child E as being, quote, incredibly stable, and reminded us that on Dr. Harkness's first examination of child E, his abdomen was soft, non-tender, non-distended, with normal bowel sounds. And thereafter, the blood gas results had shown a decline. When she was referred to the feeding chart, the one I put up on the screen for you earlier, and the reference to the mucky aspirate, Dr. Bowen said it usually refers to a sort of brownish-green aspirate, so that stomach juices plus any milk that may have been in the stomach abdomen may be containing bile and flecks of blood. Altered blood goes brown. I guess that's why it's termed dirty. In the context, then she was asked, in the context of a baby who's been fed twice at 5 and 7 p.m, been fed 2 ml, and on each occasion there'd been a minimal aspirate, what view do you take of his record that at 9 p.m, before he'd been fed, there was a 16 ml aspirate? So this is the disconnect, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? At 5 and 7 we've got minimal aspirates, 9 p.m, 2100 hours, the critical time when the mother of child E and F is there, a 16 ml aspirate. What Dr. Bowen said was, it just struck me as being really odd and out of keeping with what had gone before. Clearly, you don't just take the volume of aspirate in isolation, you have to link it to his clinical condition, which had been fine. And he had shown no signs of any gastrointestinal disturbance. He had tolerated those feeds up to that point and had no aspirate at all. So I was just at a loss to explain where this 16 mil had come from, despite having had no aspirate before and having had nothing in his tummy for 2 hours. Child N vomits clear fluid, a child that wasn't being fed at all. Child G, a projectile vomit round the cot, on the floor, on the chair, and the full amount of the feed being aspirated. It's all the same thing, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? These are not isolated freak incidents. This is a pattern of behaviour, all down to Lucy Letby. This is where you are entitled to go beyond where the experts can go. They've told you, haven't they? We look at the cases in isolation. You don't have to do that. You can look at all the evidence. You can make findings of fact as to whether someone's lying or someone's telling the truth. And it all has a part to play in the decision, doesn't it? Dr. Bowen agreed with Dr. Evans that this was a case of air injected into child E's circulation together with some kind of injury to cause the bleeding, and she said this: hemorrhage of this magnitude in neonates is vanishingly rare. Vanishingly rare. Babies do sometimes have gastric erosion and ulceration, but it does not result in hemorrhages of this fashion. That's the way she put it. Insofar as intravenous air was concerned, Dr. Bowen's view was that the purple patches on the abdomen didn't fit with any explanation other than air embolus. It was put to Dr. Bowen that in addition to an increased risk of NEC, reverse end diastolic flow could put a baby at risk of, quote, other abdominal issues. That was how it was put in cross-examination. She said not that she knew of, and if any specific issues were to be suggested, then she would be able to answer. Well, no other specific issues were put, ladies and gentlemen. So yet again, we suggest this is an example, as we suggested at the beginning with Lucy Letby's defence statement, make general allegations, look at the specifics. It's no good saying, well, the care wasn't up to it. Well, you tell us where it came up short, and we'll answer. Dr. Bowen rejected a suggestion made in cross-examination that stress could have caused excess acid in the stomach, which in turn would have caused the bleeding. So the prosecution position is this, ladies and gentlemen. All child E's signs up to and including the start of the night shift on August 3rd were normal. He was making good progress. Yet within an hour of Lucy Letby taking over at 2000 hours, things had taken a turn for the worse. What are the chances of that? In itself, it doesn't prove, of course it doesn't prove that Lucy Letby sabotaged him. But when you look at it in the light of all the other cases, where the arrival of Lucy Letby coincides with the unexpected decline of a child, we say things go beyond the reach of innocent coincidence. Her encounter with the mother of child E and F gives you more than a big clue of what was really going on. At 2100 hours, child E was bleeding from his mouth, and when he died 3.5 hours later, he was bleeding profusely. When he first collapsed, he was exhibiting an odd skin discoloration that Dr. Harkness had only ever previously seen with child A. Child E's final collapse was at a time when Dr. C and Dr. Harkness were discussing what to do and were consulting child E's records to make their decision. What were the chances of that happening at precisely that moment? Again, taken in isolation, it would tell you nothing. But this is the point about circumstantial evidence, isn't it? You don't just look at one strand, you look at the combination. You look at how these telltale signs run across the cases. That's the power of the evidence. These rapid collapses and deaths always happened when Lucy Letby was in close proximity. There are no innocent reasons for child E's collapse and death, even looking at his case in isolation. But when you take it with his brother's case and look at their cases with the children L and M and the case of child K and with the others, the responsibility of Lucy Letby for what happened becomes even clearer.